The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again you have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn.' But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the 21st century, wherever we go, whatever the place, the continent, or the country, there is so much of the opinion that if there is any religion, especially Christianity, religions should not have any rules and regulations. Why can't the church be liberal? Why can't the religious leaders be open to what's going on in the new times? Why is it that there is so much of rigidity in the religious leadership whether it is Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, or even Judaism. The first reading today, my dear friends, taken from the book of Sirach, goes back to the year 185 before the time of Jesus. The context of the text of the first reading today is that the entire nation of Israel was so full of hypocrisy as a nation. There was so much of talk about good living, religious behaviors, and also saying that we are a nation who believe in God and following the law of God. But there was there was a huge difference in what they said and what they did. So therefore, the author points out to the people of Israel, saying, in other words, you're so good in talking about your country, your nation. You talk about the law, you talk about the temple, but your life is, your entire day-to-day living is a contradiction. All of you are out to be stealing money from everyone around. You all are so good at oppressing the poor. So therefore, the author says, you have got to make a choice now. Are you going to only talk about the tradition and the law and talk about the history of your nation, or you begin to live your life from the depth of your heart? And then the author says, God has given you the choice between life and death. You can always choose to be talking about your law, your traditions. You can always talk about what is important, what is sacred. But at the same time, your nation will go down to the depths of darkness and poverty and oppression. The reason being, my dear friends, in every religion, in every institution, in every country, in every company, in every land, there is law. And there's so much of talk about the need for law and order. But then, if the law is not within your heart, if the law and order is not in your consciousness, all what you say is only empty talk. We Sri Lankans, my dear friends, there's so much of truth in what the author says here. Because in this country, all of us talk now about the need for law and order. When are we going to have the laws of the country being followed? When are we going to have justice system in place? But the question remains, until and unless the law becomes part of our collective consciousness, my dear friends, we will always be what we are. And that is why recently, or some time ago, there was this discussion on TV about the constitution of our country, and now there is this talk about the 13th Amendment. And someone who had known or studied about constitutions, he said, when Sri Lankans talk about constitution and their amendments, they betray themselves, because you only have to compare Sri Lanka with other countries in the world. United Kingdom, there is no written constitution, and the rules and regulations are followed because there is a collective consciousness that we are a democracy, there are certain values, there are certain principles, we have to follow them. And not only they have followed them, they have also prospered as a nation. But in contradiction, my dear friends, Sri Lanka has a constitution, they say, it's all about 225 pages or whatever. And by now, within this period of time, we have had 21 amendments. And we now say there is an amendment, it's already done, but never been implemented. So now it has to be implemented. It's all about lack of collective consciousness about what is right and what is important, what is sacred. The message of the author of the book of Sirach is so valuable to us also, my dear friends. Law and order, yes, it is important, but law from within your heart and your soul is the key to open the avenues for freedom and prosperity. You choose life if you have law in your heart. You choose death, as the author says, when you don't have the law of God, the law of the land within yourself. The second reading, taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthian community, Paul also was dealing with a cosmopolitan city, because they say Corinth was a port city at that time. It was a place where there was so much of immorality, prostitution, adultery, fornication, you name it, and they have it. So Paul also realized just talking about the law for purity is useless. The more you say, the more they do not follow it. The more that you insist, the less they pay attention. So Paul, in this section, in this text, he says, what no eye has seen, no ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. So now again, Paul is also insisting that you do what is right and you avoid what is wrong, not because it is to be followed, not because it is the law, not because that's what is expected of you, but it is something that comes out from within your heart. The righteousness of your heart is more important than the traditions of the law and the customs of a land and what is socially expected of each and every one of us. So therefore, my dear friends, today the first two readings prepare us to understand what Jesus is talking about in the gospel today on the Sermon on the Mount, as we say, Matthew chapter 5. The whole section in chapter 5 of Matthew's gospel is called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, one of the reasons why it is called the Sermon on the Mount is that the author of the Gospels compared Jesus with Moses. Moses went to the mountain and got the 10 Commandments and came back and preached to the people or gave the 10 Commandments because Moses was a man of authority. And his authority came because he was a man of God, chosen specially for the purpose of leading the people of Israel with a common purpose as a nation to find their liberation. Now in the gospel, according to Matthew, the author places Jesus on a mountain and he says, from the mountain came the new morality, the new philosophy for all of us in the new times, as it were. So when you read the text here, you can see that Jesus is comparing what Moses taught the people of Israel from the mountain, and then now he says again from the mountain how the law of Israel, the teachings of the prophets, has to be raised to another level. And it's interesting when he says, you know that it is always said. When you read the text carefully, you can see that. You have heard that it was said. Now, when he said, you have heard that it was said, he's referring to Moses and the law or the Old Testament. And he says, that's the law. You know that law. But then, my calling for you is go about. It is not the righteousness of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but it is your righteousness from within. Now, that is why when he says there was this tradition of offering sacrifices on the temple, on the temple altar. And he refers to that and he says, you are following that sacrifice to the letter. You are doing it every time you are expected to do it, but your heart is way away from the meaning or the spirit of offering sacrifices. And that is why he says, when you go to the altar, if you realize that you have something against your brother, go back again. It is not your sacrifice that is important, but the righteousness of your heart. And he refers to the purity at that time. There was always the teaching about, committing adultery, and it was considered as a terrible crime in the Jewish world. But Jesus says, you all are so good in carrying out this tradition. If someone is caught, you stone them to death. You are so good at talking the talk, but your walking the walk is far away. And that is why he says, if you look at a woman with lustful intent, you have already done it. So what Jesus is doing in this teaching here is that he teaches them there is a law, there are the precepts, there are the commandments. Yes, they are important, but what is important is what is within yourself, the righteousness of your heart. So therefore, my dear friends, for all of us who are living in this world in the 21st century, where there is so much of talk about being liberal, having progressive kind of thinking, all new age philosophies of life, yes, you can say that. But whatever the philosophy, whatever the law, whatever the changes that you have in a tradition, remember, in the eyes of God, it is your heart that is at the core of who you are and how we will all be judged. Is my heart truly pure from within myself? Is my heart truly compassionate from within my inner being? Or am I a person who is being righteous on the surface level, and everyone who sees me can see that here is a good man, here is a devout woman, here is someone who is living his or her own life in the tradition of our faith. Yes, it is there, but what is really going on within me? Is my heart, inner heart, the depth of my soul is truly and authentically righteous? What is important, my dear friends, in the eyes of God, what is within ourselves, more than what it is obviously there to be seen in our lives.